it's Mrs. Land here. I'm reading chapter 3 of The Trapdoor Mysteries. Tully led the way across the forest, past the beehives, through the rose garden, across the cloisters to the manor's side door. This door led to the servants' hallway, which was full of useful things like boots, logs for the fire, baskets of ribbons, brooms and mops. From there, a set of stairs led up to Lord Mollet's study. As Tully opened the side door, she could hear loud voices. One bossy, that was Mr. Bude. One spiky, that was Mrs. Sneed. And one shrieky. "It's Lady Mollet," Tully whispered. "Hide in my pinafore pocket, Squill. I want to hear what they're all saying." The squirrel snuggled in. Tully sneaked into the hallway, her arms filled with kindling. A group of people was gathered at the top of the stairs outside Lord Mollet's study where the burglary had taken place. As quietly as she could, Tully put the twigs into a basket on the tall dresser. The dresser was slightly out of line. Someone had pulled it away from the wall. It made the perfect hiding place. Tully squeezed in behind it and strained her ears to hear what was going on. "Our mother's ring! Gone!" Lady Mollet shrieked. "Our father's watch! Vanished!" Tully peered out from behind the dresser to see Lady Mollet glancing from face to face as if she was waiting for a reaction. Lord Mollet had his eyes squeezed tight. "My brooch, my bear," he muttered over and over again. Lady Mollet flung the back of her hand against her forehead and quietly slid to the floor. "Fetch a glass of water, Tully!" Mrs. Sneed called down the stairs to her. It seemed that she wasn't so invisible, even hiding behind the dresser. Tully slipped out and rushed to the kitchen. "Wait here," she whispered to Squill. She set him down in the pantry with a handful of nuts. Carrying a glass of water, she crept back into the hallway and up the stairs. Lady Mollet looked up from her pretend faint. "Oh," she said, "who are you?" Mrs. Sneed gave Tully an icy look. "This is my niece," the housekeeper said quickly. "Forget about her." She waved a hand. Tully stared hard at her feet. Broken glass from the cabinet door was strewn across the stone floor. Just by the cabinet, Tully noticed 2 sets of muddy footprints. One was a pattern of dots. Those must be from the hobnail boots, Tully realised. 3 dots were missing in the left middle. The boot must be missing 3 nails. The other set of prints was from a different kind of boot. Tully leaned a little closer. A riding boot. She could see where the stirrup had worn a groove in the sole. No one in the manor house had shoes to match these prints. Tully did all the boot polishing, so she was sure of it. These must be the burglar's footprints. Tully glanced back up. She had to tell everyone, but Mr. Bude was shaking his head. "There aren't any clues left behind," he said. "None at all." Tully cleared her throat loudly. Everyone looked at her. She pointed at the floor. "There are footprints here," she said. Mrs. Sneed was frowning at her. "By golly, yes," said Lord Mollet. He knelt down and Mr. Bude reluctantly followed, groaning at the effort of bending. "It looks like the burglar stood here," Mr. Bude pointed to the hobnail print and frowned. "Then I think he changed his shoes and stepped here." "What burglar would do that in the middle of a robbery?" Or maybe..." Tully couldn't help herself. Mrs. Sneed drew in a sharp breath. Lord Mollet didn't seem to notice. "Go on," he said. He had a kind face, soft round the edges. "Oh, Edward," Lady Mollet cut in. "We don't actually talk to the servants." Lord Mollet raised his eyebrows. "What were you saying?" he said to Tully after a pause. Tully knew she'd get in trouble later, but she was desperate to share her theory. "I don't think that the burglar... there was one burglar who changed his shoes. I think there were 2 burglars. See?" She pointed again at the footprints. one in riding boots, one in hobnail boots. The sole of the riding boot is slightly worn down at the side. Lord Mollet nodded, his eyes following the line of her finger. Tally took a deep breath and carried on talking. And one of the hobnail boots is missing 3 nails, here. Tally, that's enough! Mrs. Sneed was furious. Lord Mollet shot a glance at the housekeeper. Thank you, dear, she added, softening her voice. Why don't you go downstairs and rest? As Tally turned to leave, the housekeeper gave a final fierce whisper. Peel the potatoes! Tally rushed down the stairs. From behind her, she heard Lord Mollet let out a cry. What ho, she's right! Voices became muffled as the grown-ups bent over the footprints, and Tally felt a little thrill of happiness. Lord Mollet said I was right. That night, Tally was sent to bed with no supper, but at least there was Squill's warm, furry body to pat. Tally had set up his bed right next to her sink, and it was wonderful to know he was there. She raked her fingers through his soft fur and hummed a little song. It was a lullaby Ma used to sing to her at bedtime. Give me your hand and we'll run down past the grass, up through the trees. Give me your time and we'll sail down to the boat, up on the seas. Give me your heart and we'll fly up like a bee, down under the leaves. This is the answer I know, this is the truth I will see. All the way down I will go, down where the gate waits for me. Tally sang quietly. Today had been a good day. She had met Squill, and Lord Mollet had praised her. He was the first person to be kind to her for years. Imagine if she solved the whole crime. Then he would smile at her and tell her how well she'd done. She'd be the one who saved the manor. A warm feeling spread through her. Let's try and catch those burglars, Squill, she said. She burrowed down deeper into her sink, putting Ma's scrap of lace under her cheek. With Squill by her side, anything felt possible. Over the next few days, Tally's new friend grew more and more brave. Soon he was following her around the manor, chattering and dancing as she worked. No one in the manor house noticed Squill. Everyone was far too busy setting traps to catch the burglars in case they came back. Lord Mollet's praise of Tally had not gone unnoticed, and Sneed and Bude suddenly became determined not to be outdone by a scullery maid. Mrs. Sneed was designing a complicated scheme to catch the thief using a pair of barbecue tongs and a mousetrap. Tally, she barked, fetch me a fresh piece of cheese. Mr. Bude planned to bash through the antique marble floor with a sledgehammer, build a pit, cover it with leaves, trap the criminals when they fell in. Truly, he bossed, fetch me a large bear. The other reason no one noticed Squill was because no one really noticed Tally, unless they were looking for someone to order about. The two friends could have gone on for weeks and even months without being overlooked, but Tally was about to make the most amazing discovery that meant she'd never be invisible again. On Friday morning, Tally was washing up in the kitchen. In her head, she was running through ways the burglars might have gone into the manor house. There was no sign that any doors or windows had been forced open, yet the criminals' footprints could clearly be seen leading through the hallway and up to the study. Maybe they had used a secret passage. There was one between the scullery and the infirmary, but it had a difficult entrance code and no footprints had been found anywhere near the infirmary door. Something tugged at her memory. What was it? She was puzzling it through when Mr. Bude came running in. A spider! He squealed. Mr. Bude was terrified of spiders and snakes and cauliflowers. Where? Cried Mrs. Sneed, almost dropping her cup of tea. On the roses, the horrible six-legged beasts. Tally remembered Lord Mollet's reference book on spiders. She coughed. Spiders have 8 legs, she said. Are you saying I can't count, Tally? Tolly? Mr. Bude boomed. No. She closed her mouth and washed another plate. And there were hundreds of those string thingies they make, the butler continued. Webs, Tally suggested, but the other two ignored her. We must clean those roses right away, Mrs. Sneed declared. Yes, said Mr. Bood. They both looked at Tally. Tally sighed. She set the final plate on the draining board and wiped her hands dry. Work hard, Tally, called Mrs. Sneed as Tally picked up her cloth. Yes, Twilly, added Mr. Bood. Make sure you get every one of those horrid insects. Tally was about to point out that spiders were actually arachnids, not insects, when she saw that Mr. Bood had sunk into a chair and was stuffing his face with a large slice of chocolate cake. It looked like he'd recovered from the shock. In the rose garden, Tally gently lifted another stem. Squill held the petal for her with his tiny paw, and Tally delicately wiped it clean. She looked around. There were so many flowers. It was going to take hours to clean every petal. Tally sighed. She was desperate to go hunting for clues. Tally didn't want to hurt any of the spiders, so she and Quill carefully saved every one and put them in a box to take to the old stables. By the time the sun was high, Tally was exhausted and Squill was bored. He jumped behind the rose bushes and out again, silently begging Tally to play hide and seek. It was his favourite game. All right, Tally agreed, but just one go. You hide while I take the spiders to the stables. They'll be safe there. Then we'll finish the roses and look for clues. Tally carefully placed the box of spiders down. There you go, she said. I hope you'll be happy in your new home. There are lots of lovely dark, dry corners to hide in. She blew the spiders a kiss goodbye. As she came out of the stables, she spotted Squill running into the forest. He was the best hider. He could curl up into a little ball and snuggle into tiny spaces, but despite this, Tally would still win every time, as he could always be persuaded to come out for a ripe, fat blackberry. This time, however, she didn't have any fruit. Tally wandered up and down in between the trees, looking carefully for a bit of red fluffy tail or a pair of black eyes. She had just passed a hollow tree when she heard Squill's mischievous giggle. Aha! I found you! Tally cried, turning back. Squill shrieked in excitement. He leapt out of the hollow and scampered through the forest. Slow down! Called Tally. I can't run that fast. She chased Squill through the trees right to the edge of the estate. Tally had never been this far from the manor house since Mrs. Sneed had taken her in. She suddenly emerged from the woods to the scent of salt. Ahead of her, the cliffs met the sea. Goose pimples ran up Tally's arm as she looked around. I remember this place. This was where Ma had disappeared. The edge of the cliff was cordoned off. A sign hung from the rope saying, Danger, no entry. Squill, Tally called. Where are you? Her heart beat faster. She bit her lip to stem the rising feel of panic. The wind was strong up here. It whistled past her ears like someone was calling. Had Ma cried out when she fell? Tally couldn't remember. Squill! She shouted. The only sound that came back was the roar of the sea.